Introduction. The Legend of the Gypsy King.
This is the story of an abnormal life. So take some time to say hello to the Gypsy King. You're undefeated, undefeatable, heavyweight champion of the world, a gladiator with all the swag of an American knockout artist, plus the skilled chops shown by the greatest European prize fighters, and the pain threshold of a bare-knuckle warrior. No doubt, God blessed me with a lot, a sledgehammer jab, dancing feet, and a fearless attitude that allowed me to destroy my rivals during a powerhouse career, featuring 33 fights, 32 wins, 0 losses. Yeah, my Matrix experienced a glitch with a 2018 draw against Deontay Wilder, but that's never bothered me. I've long been the admiral of HMS I Don't Give a Fuck, the most entertaining showman since the days of Muhammad Ali, the greatest fighter of my generation. And being good looking hasn't harmed me any either.
23rd of April 2022. Wembley Stadium. Fury v White. It was showtime, Dossers. And the arena went crazy. Lights and camera flashes flickered around the crowd. Lads threw pints. Women screamed my name. And who could blame them? This was a showdown for the history books. A bout against the British heavyweight Dillian the Body Snatcher White at a Ramo Wembley Stadium heaving with 94,000 punters. The biggest ever crowd for a European boxing match. After 2 years of pandemic misery, the country was thirsty for a massive party, and the Gypsy King was going to give them one. The hype had been so big that ticket sales for Fury v White outsold some of the most famous names in pop music. Making an entrance to remember on a night like this was a big deal, so I was carried into the arena on a gold throne. And as I was hoisted into the air, I felt like a master of the universe. This is the superstar atmosphere I've always enjoyed as a boxer, and the experience of connecting with it has always been surreal and incredible. At that moment, I became supercharged, like I'd been plugged into the electrics, and my adrenaline soared. Not bad for an old fat fella, I thought, looking around at the craziness. A bald-headed lad from Morecambe, a seaside town in the middle of nowhere. But even though I was partying too, my eyes were still fixed on the prize. I needed a win to match the pizzazz. I'd picked a soundtrack to match the mood, and it rocked through the Wembley PA. The first cut was Sex on Fire by Kings of Leon, a song that had often helped me to find a groove in training. I belted it out with everyone in the stadium, like we were pals in a karaoke pub, or celebrating an England win in the World Cup. The second song, Juicy, by rapper the Notorious B.I.G., aka Biggie Smalls, was there because its lyrics, "It was all a dream," reminded me of my own life. Being Tyson Fury was like a dream. In Biggie's case, he'd read hip-hop magazines as a kid, listened to rap radio and stuck pictures of his heroes to the bedroom wall before becoming a legend. I'd been the same, but with boxing. I'd watched the fights, read about the great heavyweights, and tacked photos of my heroes around the place. Some people told me I wouldn't make it as a fighter, and the same had been said to Biggie about his music career, but neither of us had listened to the critics. We'd both reached for the stars instead. And tonight, I was ready to shine. The crowd seemed to whirl around me like leaves in a hurricane, and I was the eye. As the noise for my final entrance continued to build, I knew that these were my people, and this was my moment. The 9-year-old version of myself would have loved the buzz and the colour. So soak up every second of it, pal, I thought. And when I saw the ring ahead, it was hard not to think about what would happen to the boxing world once I'd left. Who could fill this void? At that point, retirement was on my mind and about to become a major talking point. But if I walked away for good, the sport would probably return to how it was pre-Gypsy King, full of boring fighters that very few people cared about. The papers were going to miss me too. I only had to crack open a can of lager or walk into a pub with my shirt off for them to write a front-page headline. These were the nights I lived for. I was like a gladiator striding into his arena, and it was hard not to feel a sense of pride, because my contest with White seemed like so much more than a boxing match. That had a lot to do with the date. 23rd of April, St. George's Day, a moment in the calendar that means a lot to me, because I'm very proud of my roots. Fury v White was an all-English clash too, a moment in national sporting history, And you know how us English do when it comes to a battle. We hold our shit down. Psychologically, the fact that I was fighting on home turf for the first time in years was a motivational boost. It was a death or glory clash, and I wanted to do everything in my power to bring a buzz to the nation. For this momentous occasion, I was wearing a white and red robe, England colours. I'd also heard a person could look much bigger than they actually were when dressed in white, thanks to a trick of the eye, in much the same way that wearing black creates a slimming effect. To my opponent I must have looked humongous, like a 6'9" monster, and terrifying, because I'd picked a pair of specially designed St. George's Cross boxing gloves for the battle. A fist wrapped in a flag. My plan was to smack White in the mouth so hard that the country would be shaking for days afterwards. Some people were doubting my chances of winning, but no way was I messing up at Wembley Stadium, and to make sure, I ran through my usual pre-match routines during the build-up. In the dressing room, I moved about in my underpants, singing and dancing, cracking jokes, only stopping to take a seat on the massage table to watch the undercard and have my hands wrapped. I've studied boxers my whole life, as both a fan and a fighter, and knew that before a title bout I was unlike a lot of the others. Stress ricocheted off me, even in a venue as big as Wembley Stadium, and I liked to mess about with the music cranked loud. I've seen many other changing rooms throughout my career, and most of them were like death parties. You'd think the boxers involved were going under the guillotine. Blokes were pale and panting. They shook with nerves and punched the walls as a way of firing themselves up. Everyone alongside them looked frazzled with terror. But not me. Not in my space, and definitely not at Wembley. I was a disco diva getting ready to shine. I was about to get paid, and about to get laid, and I loved having the cameras and the press around me in the dressing room because it added to the sense of occasion. During those moments, I could tell what everybody was thinking. Why is he acting like this? He's going out there to fight a man who could potentially kill him with one punch. He just doesn't give a damn. But that's what sets me apart from most people in life. Giving a damn is not my thing, and knowing my resolve won't wobble under pressure, I have every confidence my body won't falter either, no matter the challenge. The faith that I can withstand all punishment then creates even more self-belief in what is an ever-expanding circle of positivity. Wembley, though being my biggest ever fight, was no different. I was ready to go. I ran through a warm-up with my dad John alongside me, plus my trainer Sugar Hill Stewart, a former Detroit policeman and the nephew of the Boxing Hall of Fame trainer Emmanuel Manny Stewart, and the nutritionist George Lockhart. Together we moved through some pad work. Bang, bang, bang. Everything felt nice and easy, though I wasn't overconfident or in a massively cocky mood. I always took precautions, and as I got myself together for the walk into Wembley, I pulled my team about me for a group prayer. Dear Lord, please give us strength and the ability to go in there and give our best performance, I said. We pray for the opponent to do exactly the same, and most of all, we pray that both men can come out in one piece and go home to their families. The time to rock and roll had arrived. My boxing life has been made up of two careers. The first took place between 2008 and 2015, a period in which I was unable to recognise the psychological demons dragging me down. They pulled on me like a rucksack full of stones, despite the fact I was on my way to becoming the heavyweight champion of the world. The second career kicked off in 2018 after a brutal battle with my mental health, a war I'm still locked into today. Through sheer will, I was able to overcome my issues and return as the planet's most entertaining pugilist. Most books begin at the beginning and end at the end, which might work for your average run-of-the-mill author, but the Gypsy King is a bona fide legend and a once-in-a-lifetime superhero. So why on earth would I tell my story in an average run-of-the-mill way? It's for this reason that Gloves Off starts at the end and finishes at the beginning of the end, with my full and uncensored roller coaster of a journey jammed in between. And the revelations will spin your head in the best possible way. I'll tell you about the glories of my second career and discuss the idea that I might leave the stage while still at the peak of my powers. Then I'll detail where I came from and how I defeated the then champion Vladimir Klitschko in 2015 to become a boxing titan, before explaining how I very nearly lost everything, but I was able to claw it all back. Yeah, I wrote about depression in my first book, Behind the Mask, but everything was so raw back then. I was still working through my illness at that time, and I've since found a new sense of perspective, in and out of boxing. I'm also at a point where I have a reckoning to contend with. The realisation that my boxing adventure is drawing to a close. It's from this perspective that I'll relive several other famous events and fights that I've written about previously. I hope you'll enjoy the new insights and a fresh twist or two. So while I've long been admiral of HMS I Don't Give a Crap, the most entertaining showman since the days of Muhammad Ali and the greatest fighter of my generation, it's important to know that, as far as I'm concerned, boxing has always been a business with a shelf life. A sport, yes, a lucrative form of entertainment for sure, but statistically the people that stay in the game for too long have a tendency to get damaged, really damaged, and I don't want that happening to me. There's also a risk that my career has been shortened by the way in which I've lived my life. Health and nutrition was not exactly a priority for large chunks of my time as a pro. I ballooned in weight between bouts, and then, during the mental health breakdown that started in 2015, I boozed, binged, and tried cocaine. There was even an attempt at ending it all a year later, when I pointed my Ferrari at a bridge and slammed on the accelerator, though I changed my mind at the last second and pulled away. Thank God. When I eventually asked for help, I was diagnosed as being bipolar, paranoid, and suffering from anxiety and obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. I later recovered, but my mental health issues remain a constant work in progress. From time to time, I can have suicidal thoughts, though I now understand what's needed to keep my demons at arm's length. It's not as if boxing is my entire world either. The reality is that I'm a husband, a dad, a son, a brother, and an uncle. My family are my armour, and Paris and my 6 beautiful kids are always in my thoughts because they're so precious to me. On the eve of my 2021 fight with Deontay Wilder, I slept on a hospital floor, as our youngest child, Athena, fought for her life shortly after being born, and her successful battle inspired me to win mine. 3 years earlier, it was Paris who picked me off the canvas when I'd been poleaxed by depression. At the beginning of my career, my dad and my uncles provided me with the tools to become a top boxer, though I was also taught how to earn an honest day's wage by selling second-hand cars. Throughout my life, the Fury family has provided all the love and support I've needed to succeed. I want them to receive the same love as me, from me. So while getting my face punched in for a living has put millions of pounds in the bank, a fighter needs to know when their time is up, and mine is near. The issue of whether I will fight again could have been settled by the time you listen to this book. I might have retired, knocked out another dosser, or perhaps agreed to a bout in the near future. And the speculation surrounding that decision has been a right circus. In this book, I want you to know the truth about my thinking regarding these decisions. A lot's been going through my head, and me changing my mind lately isn't a flippant thing. Walking away from boxing may be the hardest thing I ever do. All I know is that I don't want to overstay my welcome, ruin my legacy, or die from a big right to the side of the head. And believe me, an ending like that has felt worryingly real at times. I even experienced short-term memory loss following that bruising encounter with Wilder in 2021, when, in the hours after the win, my head covered in tennis ball-sized lumps, it was impossible to remember how many times I'd gone down. Everything was foggy, and the experience frightened me. No way do I want to end up living out my days in a wheelchair or eating my dinners through a straw. So here it all is for the first time. My boxing life, set out in full, from the first fight to, maybe, the last, the highs and the lows, and all the hits and knockdowns in between. In what follows, I'll dish out stories and secrets. I'll tell you about my toughest adversaries in and out of the ring, and lay out the reasons for why I'll eventually walk away from professional boxing in my prime, as a legend. So what are you waiting for? Get stuck in.
So here it all is. For the first time, my entire boxing life laid out in full, featuring the first fight and the last fight, the highs and lows, and all the knockdowns in between. In the coming pages, I outline the nuts and bolts of my mind-blowing career and explain how I came to be the greatest sporting showman of the 21st century. No other boxing story can lay a glove on this one, so get ready for the mic drop.
Tyson Fury, Morecambe Bay, September 2022.
What am I to gain from it? What if I have another fight or another 10 fights? What am I actually to gain from boxing?
Part 1. The Undefeated. Chapter 1. Spilled Blood. Here's what was going through my mind at the end of 2021. I was tired of boxing. Sick of it. I'd well and truly had enough, and the thought of retiring was becoming more and more appealing. It hadn't been an overnight brainwave, though, or a knee-jerk reaction. Instead, the idea had been building for a while, over a period of time, and a number of hits to the head and body. But despite my feelings, I still wanted to consider the implications long and bloody hard, because walking away from the sport I'd once loved for so long wasn't an easy thing to do. The bottom line was this. At the time, I was 33 years old, and the feeling that I might have been getting on a bit was playing on my mind. Some people could have argued that at my age I was still in my prime as a heavyweight. I suppose ordinarily that would have been the case. But one of the things I'd learned from studying boxing was that too many people struggled to recognise when their time was up. For one reason or another, they couldn't walk away, and in the end they hung around for so long that the decision eventually came back to bite them on the arse. I'm talking about the fighters that didn't pay enough attention to their game or couldn't recognise their breaking points. Rather than listening to their bodies or the subtle warnings their brains were sending them, they pressed ahead. Perhaps they'd chosen to ignore the alarm bells because they were in denial or had become too obsessed with money and fame. Having carried on for too long, taking on one last match, maybe 10, they then tarnished their record by losing a lot of blood in the battle, destroying what might have been an incredible legacy. No way was I following that path. I was the best fighter in the game at the time. What I'd achieved was more valuable than a massive bank account, or the satisfaction of seeing my face on the telly. I even watched Vladimir Klitschko refuse to accept his truth close up when I came to fight him in 2015. He was 39 years old and clearly slowing down, even though he was still the reigning champion. For some reason, he couldn't see his end was on the horizon, but I could, so I told him. Every dog has its day, I said. The mind might be willing, but the body won't follow. He wasn't having it. Age is just a number. It's how you feel. I shook my head. You'll find out that's not true. At the end of the day, you've been a great world champion, but boxing's a young man's game. I proved my point shortly afterwards, beating him in the Esprit Arena in Dusseldorf after a full 12 rounds and a unanimous decision to take the WBA, Super, IBF, WBO, IBO and ring titles for the first time. So I knew that there was no way of cheating time. What had happened to Klitschko could just as easily happen to me if I wasn't careful. And a few years after my 2018 comeback, I found myself weighing up my options. I realised there was nothing to be gained by overstaying my welcome like an unwanted party guest. Losing was one thing, but the risk to my mortality was a whole other ballgame, and so far I'd avoided any serious injuries. That said, I was experiencing pain on a daily basis. The wear and tear on my body was becoming noticeable, mainly in my elbows and shoulders, but that was hardly surprising given I'd banged, punched and ripped at things for a living. Most of the time I gritted my teeth through the discomfort, and whenever that got too much I'd see a doctor. Still, I understood there was a chance my luck would run out at some point, and that I'd injure myself in such a way that would be screwed up for the rest of my life. A serious back or hand injury didn't bear thinking about, though the more extreme consequences of violence were much nastier, like a bomb to the side of the head that could kill or paralyse me. There was no way I wanted to put my family through that ordeal, especially Paris, because she would be the one left to push me around for the rest of my days. Those risks had to be taken seriously. There was also the understanding that my career had affected everyone around me, from the minute I turned pro. Mum never watched me fight. She hated it. Paris turned as white as a sheet whenever I took a punch. She hated it too. While the kids had grown up knowing all about my career and loved me being in the limelight, they didn't like it when another fighter laid a glove on me. I was an invincible to them. Of course, I had a different perspective. Well, I would. Whenever I was fighting, only the heavyweight world championship was on the line, and I didn't give much thought to anything else, because I knew I was going to win. But for the family as a whole, the stakes were so much higher. My making it through a fight unhurt was their world, and they used to stress that everything might come crashing down were I to mess it up in some way. It was time to take that stress into consideration. That's why boxing is such a selfish profession, and boxers are such selfish people. A fighter risks his or her health alone. That means they have to think about themselves a lot of the time. And if you think I'm chatting bollocks, take a look at the fans screaming and yelling at the men or women in the ring the next time you're watching a fight in a rowdy stadium or pub. You think they'd want to take a punch or 10? The only person that can take those blows or throw those shots back is the person in the battle. So don't be surprised when that person then dedicates every hour of their day to being the best, because the reality is that if they don't, there's a good chance the next opponent will cause them some serious damage. That's the reason why any fighter worth their salt makes everything about them during the build-up to a big fight, even if it means living away from home in a training camp for 2 to 3 months at a time. They have to be a selfish motherfucker. The chances of them being a success are slim otherwise, no matter how many amazing trainers, nutrition experts or advisors they have about the place. That is exactly my attitude. During training camps, I'm like a Spartan warrior. Doesn't matter whether I'm preparing to fight one bloke or an army, I'm going to do everything to win. My opponents are losing, and I'm not going to let anybody distract me as I work. Everything is blocked out. Life's petty matters have to wait until the fight is over. I don't want to know about any news until the right time has arrived, and at the start of every camp I set out the rules. I can't be hearing about day-to-day life. I don't want to know about what happened at the supermarket. I don't want to know that someone's been to the dentist. Tell me about it after the fight. Like I said, boxing's a selfish sport. I have to live in a different world. Paris was okay with that attitude, because life had always been that way for us, ever since we'd been kids. I'd always boxed, and she'd always understood that I had to become a different person in training camp. I couldn't be in husband mode. I couldn't be in daddy mode, or brother, son, or friend mode for that matter. I had to be in fight mode, because so much was on the line. But there was no doubt it had been a massive sacrifice for everyone. Throughout my career, I've been away from my family for long periods of time, whether that was being on the road, travelling, or training. So coming home was another reason to consider retirement. I owed it to everyone I loved. None of these motives for retiring should be mistaken for fear, by the way. I certainly don't feel scared for myself. It's the people around me I worry for. I've never been intimidated by an opponent, and I've always stepped into the ring knowing I'm going to smash the other fella to bits, whatever happens. In fact, around the time I first considered leaving the sport, I took the kids to a fairground. As we walked past the stalls and through the arcades, I saw a punchball machine. A picture of my face glowed on the front in bright lights, and underneath, in big letters, was something I'd said in a press conference a few years previously. I'm not even scared of the devil. If the devil confronted me, I'd confront him as well. That line pretty much sums up my attitude. I stare down the devil every day, especially when I'm dealing with life's distractions and temptations, though that only really happens when I haven't been in the gym for a while, or if my routine is thrown out of kilter. My dad thinks I'm weird, as do my cousins and brothers. The other day, Dad said to me, "You've achieved everything. You're a multi-millionaire, and the best thing you can think of in life is to go to the gym twice a day. You need your head testing." But that's what makes me happy. Not exercising makes me sad. So I went for a run to feel better about it all, and my dad, brother and cousin kidnapped me. They took me for a drive that ended up with them dragging me to all these places that were supposed to be fun, but actually turned out to be non-existent rubbish. It took me away from the house and out of my routine at a time when I wanted to be moving from errand to errand. By the time I'd finished running around with them like a headless chicken, I felt thoroughly depressed. It messed my day up, because I don't like being idle. I want to get up at the crack of dawn and work, not stopping until I've closed my eyes at night. In those situations, if ever I do feel bad, I think back to the country song, "I'm going to have a little talk with Jesus" by Randy Travis. In the lyrics, the devil tries to drag Randy into a dark spot. The singer even speaks about seeing his face 100 times, and to get over it, he checks in with Jesus at the end of the day. I've decided that's what I'll do too, because my belief is that before anyone does anything in life, good or bad, there is a get-out moment. A split second of opportunity where they can either fall prey to the temptation in front of them, or regain some composure and move on. It's down to the individual to know how to stand strong, but it requires a healthy state of mind to succeed. I want to do everything possible to be emotionally ready for these moments. That way, I can make the right call whenever the devil comes around. So considering my daily showdowns, what makes you think I'd be afraid of a boxing match? There was another reason to think about quitting while I was still ahead. I'd watched too many of my heroes retiring badly. The cliched backstory of a boxer speaks of someone without a lot of brains, certainly someone who hasn't come from an educated or privileged background. Instead, they've scraped their way out of the roughest part of town before being put on the right path in the boxing gym. If they are talented enough, they're immediately thrust into the limelight and introduced to a crazy new world as a pro. It's sink or swim time. But despite their talents, they don't have any experience with money. They don't have any experience with business. They don't have any experience of lawyers or managers, agents or the taxman. And why would they? Everything is alien, and so they sink, making bad decision after bad decision, regardless of whether they're any good in the ring or not, before inevitably running out of cash. Forced to stay in the game so they can retire with something, anything in their bank account, they are then battered from pillar to post. And still they end up poor. Of course, there were exceptions to the rule. Larry Holmes was reported to have opened a series of businesses following his departure from the sport. His portfolio included a nightclub, some restaurants, a training facility, and business complex. George Foreman came out of retirement and then made a second career for himself by promoting the George Foreman Grill. That made him a few quid, and then some. Lennox Lewis held on to his money too, but there were thousands more fighters that finished up flat out broke than rich. I'm not heading that way, because my dad has long taught me that the key to avoiding the financial banana skins is to surround yourself with a strong and supportive team. I was also raised to be straight and honest, like a nail. If I bought something at a price, I stood on, no matter how screwed up it later turned out to be. I had to be a man of my word. What I said, I did, and if I didn't deliver my promises, then I was a piece of shit. I had cash as a kid, because I was taught how to earn from an early age. We'll get on to that later. And so the upbringing I experienced has made me very different to a lot of fighters. Image isn't my thing either. Now don't get me wrong, I know my value and I love to put on a show. It just isn't the be-all and end-all. I don't like throwing my earnings around like nobody's business either. Yeah, I'm guilty of splashing a few quid here and there, and at the top of my list is a Rolls-Royce Jeep. But I also own a £700 VW Passat, which gets way more miles because I use it as a runaround every day. No lie, I find more enjoyment in the Passat than the Rolls, because no one cares about a bloke in a Passat. They don't stare, they don't point, and they don't ask for pictures. But whenever I swan about town in a roller, I never get 5 minutes of peace. So at the end of 2021, as I was weighing all of this up, I felt there was nothing to be gained from hanging around in the game for too long. It helped that I'd already earned enough money and been smart with it. In boxing terms, I'd also gone beyond what I thought was possible, times a million. I felt happy with who I was at the beginning of my career. I felt happy with who I was as I approached the end. Forget risking my rep by fighting into my late 30s, or longer. There was too much at stake. Some fighters found the fame and fortune too hard to walk away from. Not me. I also knew that the minute other fighters had made their retirement official, public demand had often made them think otherwise. This is one of the reasons why boxing is such a hard sport to say goodbye to. There will always be someone who wants a retiring fighter to hang on for longer, especially if they're at the peak of their powers. Still, I wasn't going to risk losing a few fights or hitting the skids. Why should anyone else get to say when enough is enough, I thought. And if I leave it to someone else to pick my end date, when will that be? 2 more years? 6 more years? 1 more fight? 1 more fight after 1 more fight? So if I decided to continue, it would be on my terms, because every career had to come to an end eventually, and I wanted mine to conclude right. I'd given my blood to boxing for 20 years as both an amateur and pro. There wasn't too much more to spill.
It was before the Wilder 3 fight. I was upstairs in my house in Vegas and I said to Paris, I said, this is the last fight, babe. No more now. This is it. I'd been a pro 13 years. I just thought, when you know, that's it. There was no specific moment. There was nothing. I wasn't even boxing at that time. I was in a room upstairs in the house. Yeah. And I just said to Paris, like, this is it. This is the last boxing fight. And when I had the Wilder fight, I come out and I was happy. I was done. And then I had the opportunity to come home and fight at Wembley, and I did that one last one. But although I've just had a phone call from the promoter saying he can get me a fight there and there and a lot of money, X amount of millions and stuff, it's all tempting stuff. But what am I to gain from it? What if I have another fight or another 10 fights? What am I actually to gain from boxing? It's a lot to risk. There's stuff that money can't buy that I'm risking, but nothing to gain. Not one thing. Only money. I'm risking everything. Risking me life, me health, me family. I'm risking injury, death. Like you say, me elite members VIP only club that you can't buy your way into. Like if I was to fight somebody in my next fight, whoever it might be, Joe Bloggs, then what am I to gain from it? Apart from a few quid, which I've already got money. So it won't alter my life if I earn another $1 billion or another 20 billion. It's not going to affect the way I live because I only live one way. I've never changed at all in my whole life. I'm still the same old G as I always was. So that side of it doesn't interest me. As long as I can pay my bills and put food on the table, that's enough for me. The rest of it's unimportant. I remember at the end of the fight, like I come out of the ring and I said to my brother Shane, I said, how many times did I go down there? 3 or 4 times? Didn't remember. I knew I was in Las Vegas, but I didn't know where I was, didn't remember the hotel name, didn't know anything.
Chapter 2. No guts, no glory. If one fight showed me how dangerous boxing could really be, it was my 3rd and final battle with the American Deontay Wilder in 2021. I emerged victorious, but bloody hell, it was a slog. I can remember taking so many powerful hits to the head that even the simple act of thinking straight became a mission once the contest was finished. Afterwards, I told Paris I'd made up my mind. I was done. This is the last one, baby. I won't put you through no more. Thank God for that, she said. The only other person I needed to speak to on the matter was my promoter, Frank Warren. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I just gave him the news, straight. Look, I'm retiring after the fight, I said. Fair play to him. Frank didn't try to change my mind. Whatever you want to do, it's your choice, he said. If you want to carry on with boxing, then great. If you don't, also great. You got to do what's best for you. I felt good about my decision. The important people in my life had been told, and with Deontay Wilder packed off to bed, I was going to live a life of comfort, having made more than enough money. Plus Paris and I had just had our 6th child, Athena. The future life of the Gypsy King was all mapped out. But as a certain someone once said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Turns out, I was no different. Let's go back a little bit. Each and every one of my 3 fights with Deontay Wilder between 2018 and 2021 was a battle, and understandably so because the bloke was a beast. As the reigning WBC World Heavyweight Champion, he was built like a brick shithouse, a 6'7" high wall of muscle, tattoos and rage. Wilder also had no clues when it came to tasting defeat. He was an absolute badass with a 40-0 record. Nobody in their right mind wanted to fight him at the time. Well, nobody apart from me. Sod it, I thought, when the fight was arranged. I'll lose some weight and get in there. Then I'll beat him up and knock him out. Several months earlier, before the Wilder fight had been set, I'd started the process of shaving away 10 stone in weight. Bloody hell, I was in a right state. I hadn't exactly looked after my body during the early stages of my career, and as a young pro, I would often train and then shove a load of pies down my gullet. That process only worsened during my horrific breakdown, where I drank way too much and binged on junk food, expanding to around 30 stone in weight. The recovery was brutal, and under the instruction of my new coach, Ben Davison, I hammered myself into the ground to get fit and emotionally well again. For a few months, Ben even moved into the Fury family home, and I trained with him every day, twice a day, as I worked on getting back in shape. While this was going on, the haters arrived in force to shoot their mouths off with claims that I would never return to boxing's top level. Dumb move. The talking only fired me up even more. I was the lineal heavyweight champion of the world, so in my head quitting was not an option. One morning I decided to run up the Jubilee Tower, a steep hill in Lancaster. This was a challenge much loved by the local health fanatics with their six-packs and Fitbits. But I was still overweight and massively out of puff, and as I made my first few strides, a car passed me by. "Get in the back, mate," shouted the driver. "It's too far to the top. You're going to have a heart attack." The offer of a lift was like a red rag to a bull. Someone had told me that running up the Jubilee Tower was impossible, so that meant I was bloody well going to do it. "I'm getting to the bloody mountaintop," I shouted. "Don't worry about me. And if I have a heart attack, kick me in the nuts while I'm down for being a fat bastard." Salvaging my boxing career was also a major project at the time, because when I'd withdrawn from the Klitschko rematch in 2016 due to injury, my licence was suspended by the British Boxing Board of Control. In the end, my licence was eventually reinstated, and everybody wanted to know who my first big opponent would be. There were 2 potential names on the wish list, Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder. Though first up, I had to win a couple of comeback fights against the Albanian Sefer Seferi in June 2018, and then a couple of months later, Francesco Pianetta of Germany. Both were dispatched without too much bother, and when a hyped fight between Joshua and Wilder failed to materialise, I was given a free shot at the American. A lot of people thought I was taking on too dangerous an opponent too soon. Ben feared that I hadn't recovered enough, as did my dad, who wouldn't speak to me for several weeks because I'd ignored his warnings that fighting Wilder might kill me. Meanwhile, Wilder probably thought he was onto an easy payday, given the state of me during the last few years. I couldn't have cared less. My confidence had reached new altitudes, and with the fight confirmed for the 1st of December 2018 in the Staples Center, Los Angeles, I became unshakable again. Nothing was going to intimidate me, and I proved it at a press conference at the BT TV Towers in London, where I stated exactly what I was going to do to Wilder. I told him I wanted to feel his punches before goading him into a body spar. I called him a big dosser as the promoter Frank Warren stood between us. Then, when he eventually gave me a shove, I laughed in his face. "My wife pushes harder than that," I shouted. "Have you ever looked into the eyes of a killer?" he said. Wilder thought he could rile me up, but he was wrong. "Plenty of them," I said, "and I'm looking at a pussycat. Killers don't dress like you. You're all mouth and no action. All front and no substance. A big hollow shell and a big frame." I had a bloody good reason for feeling so strong at the time. I decided the fight wasn't just for me. After my experiences with depression, Fury v Wilder had become a fight for the millions of people suffering from a mental health issue. I wanted to be a beacon of light for anyone experiencing an emotionally rocky time, and knowing I was in the process of overcoming my problems, I reckoned that defeating Wilder, the sport's biggest puncher, would prove to the world that it was possible to heal and succeed. That was some powerful rocket fuel at my back. I felt inspired and talked about my story in interviews. though this new way of thinking was very different to how I'd operated before my last world heavyweight title fight against Klitschko in 2015. Back then, everything had been about beating the fighter at the top of the tree. Nothing more, nothing less. The Tyson Fury of 2018 was a new prospect. Even though the odds were stacked against me in the Staples Centre, I felt no doubt as I walked to the ring, singing and dancing, my tongue wagging. Gala's 1996 house classic, Freed from Desire, pulsed through the building. The Gypsy King was back. I kissed the wooden crucifix around my neck and bumped fists with the fans. There was a determination to take so much more out of the experience than during my last world title fight, but there was really no other way to think. I had to believe myself, because sometimes that was the only difference between a top-class performer and the person in second place. The winner knows it's his or her time as they step into the moment. They use the pressure to drive themselves forward. But the loser arrives full of fear. They're cowed by uncertainty. I've long understood that if you don't believe a victory is inevitable, there is every chance a loss is coming your way. It's one of the reasons why the men's England football team have blown so many penalty shootouts over the years. The truth is this: you'll move mountains if you can carry faith the size of a mustard seed. That was my belief, and for the first 9 rounds against Wilder, I was able to prove it, because a win seemed to be very much on the cards. I outfought and outthought the big dosser, ducking away from his biggest shots and clocking him with a series of heavy hits. I laughed in his face, and I flicked my tongue out to taunt him. After the first 8 rounds, the judges had marked me down as winning a lot of them, and then I got cocky. Following a burst of short rights to my face in the 9th, I allowed Wilder to clip me around the back of the skull, and I dropped to the floor. My feeling was that he'd thrown an illegal behind the head punch and should have received a warning from the ref, but no call was made. Was I bothered? No. Not getting the decision was hardly surprising. I was in Wilder's backyard. It was his show, his country, and his fans. The big shouts were always likely to swing in the way of the home fighter, because that's what happens in a fight of that nature. In many ways, a contest on foreign soil was a bit like starting a round of golf without a driver. I understood that to win, I would have to do something very special. And if I couldn't, and the fight remained relatively tight at the death, the points might not go my way. I got to my feet quickly and loaded up on Wilder again, rocking him with some heavy 1-2s before outboxing him in round 11. Then came the big plot twist. As I jogged to the corner, my trainer, Ben Davison, told me to play it smart. "You're winning," he said. "Don't take risks. See it out." Ben believed that I was leading on points, which meant Wilder needed a knockout punch in the final round to snatch victory. Acting rashly, he warned, was going to give it to him on a plate. But I was looking to deliver something much more spectacular than a cautious performance. When the bell dinged for the 12th, there was only one thought in my head: winning in style. It's time for the stopper, I thought, the showcaser, and I'm knocking him out. It's funny how life turns out sometimes. With 2 minutes and 23 seconds left on the clock, the exact opposite happened, as Wilder decked me with a powerful combination. A left jab, a right hand to the side of the head, and then a left hook across my chin. For a moment, every ambitious thought I'd had in my head went sideways, because I was briefly unconscious. My brain wobbled as the ref counted down my title hopes. 1. So I'm out on the canvas, flat on my back. 2. My thinking is all over the place. What the hell has gone on here? I was on my feet a second ago, and now I'm on the deck, but I haven't felt a thing. 3. Wilder's walking over to the neutral corner. He's blowing a kiss at his wife. 4. The ref's on one knee. He's in my face. Are my senses coming together? 5. I roll onto my knees. 6. It's time to move. Though I've been out for a few seconds, everything feels clear. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm hitting Wilder into next week. 7. Okay, no problem, you sausage, I think. I'm going to give it to you. 8. Finally, I'm upright. There's 2 minutes left on the clock, give or take. My lights are back on. 9. The ref's shouting now. He's asking me if I can carry on. I put my arms on his shoulders and nod my head up and down. I'm staring into his eyes. Yes, I'm okay. Game on. I'd risen like the mythical phoenix from those ashes. The ref had seen it. He was stepping aside. Wilder had seen it too, though he couldn't believe his eyes, and while he was able to briefly pin me to the corner, hitting me with everything he had, I knew I had it in me to hold firm. It was time to attack, because the world title was there for the taking. I put my hands behind my back at one point. Then I threw a big sweeping left hook and caught him with one or two combinations. Bang, bang. When the final bell rang shortly afterwards, I was convinced the win was mine, despite my 2 knockdowns. Surely I'd been the better fighter overall, but the judges had other ideas and called a draw. I couldn't get my head around it, nor could anyone in the arena. For a few moments it seemed as if a riot was going to kick off, and I did my best to simmer the tension. By fighting on American soil, I like to think that I was acting in an ambassadorial role for England. Also, I felt fairly satisfied. There was no reason to play up, because my plan had been to show the world that it was possible for a person to turn their life around, no matter how deep they'd fallen. I'd managed exactly that, and in doing so, I'd landed a heavy blow for everyone struggling with a mental health problem. By not losing, I'd emerged victorious. The realization was as good as any title or belt. Thousands of letters arrived at the Fury house, each one thanking me for speaking openly about my mental health struggles before and after the Wilder bout. By the looks of it, the style in which my fight had played out was speaking volumes. I was knocked down in the final round at a time when most fighters would have struggled to rally. But instead I shocked everyone by rising to my feet and battling on, even with Wilder smelling blood. Talk about symbolic. It was pretty much the story of my darkest years in a nutshell. Meanwhile, the drama surrounding the tied result had elevated my status in America big time. Suddenly, the Gypsy King was a serious deal, much larger than I'd ever been before, which felt like an important step up. Anyone looking to advance their career to the next level was required to crack the States at some point, whether they worked in sport, film, or music. I used to hear it all the time. You've got to take the USA, pal. But top billing status had always felt out of reach somehow, even when I'd battered Klitschko. Now the tide was turning. The manner in which I'd attacked Wilder in LA, plus that debatable points decision, meant that everybody wanted to see the Gypsy King in action on the biggest stage again. Me more than anyone. As a result, I signed a lucrative TV deal with the sports channel, ESPN, and another with the promoter, Top Rank, though this would make the Fury v Wilder 2 showdown a little harder to schedule, as it required what was called a co-promotion. History has shown that these kinds of deals happened rarely, because the promoters involved had big egos, and the negotiations could turn into a dick-swinging contest. Still, my rematch with Wilder was obviously the clash that everybody wanted to see, a contest for all the marbles. All I could do to ensure that it happened was to win my next 2 scheduled fights in Vegas against Tom Schwartz from Germany and Otto Wallin of Sweden. If everything went well, I'd get my second shot at Wilder. Given that the Schwartz fight would be my debut performance on ESPN, it was important to make a splashy entrance, especially as everyone was tuning in to see the loudmouth Brit with a colourful backstory. But how? In the end, I returned to some of the costumes I'd drawn as a kid, when I used to fantasize about my future boxing career, and landed at the Stars and Stripes outfit worn by Apollo Creed, the bad guy turned good guy from the Rocky films. The idea was a banger. I knew the Vegas crowd would lap it up, though I initially bamboozled everybody by walking through the arena corridors in a drab black robe. With my movements being played on the big screens, this was nothing more than a classic sleight of hand, and once I'd started my ring walk, the robe was pulled away to reveal a pair of star-spangled shorts and a matching silk gown. Someone then plonked a red, white and blue top hat onto my head. Glitz and glamour, baby. The mood was completed when James Brown's Living in America ripped through the PA. I strutted towards the ring, knowing I'd stolen the show. Schwartz was 25 years old at the time and an up-and-coming talent, but he was fighting me too soon, even though he'd been ranked number 9 in the world by the IBF. To prove it, I spent the first round pumping him with jabs. During the second, I bloodied Schwartz's nose before retreating onto the ropes and dropping my hands for fun. Then I allowed him to rip away at me with a series of free shots. For a brief moment, time seemed to come to a standstill. It was like I'd transformed into Neo, Keanu Reeves' character from The Matrix. I bent the fabric of reality, twisting this way and that, dodging every shot by arching my neck and jerking my shoulders. Nothing Schwartz could throw at me was going to connect, and as the crowds lost their minds, I decided to turn the screw, punishing him in double quick time. Pow, pow, pow! With an impressive technical knockout, the Gypsy King had given the TV producers everything they could have dreamt of. Speed, power, cojones. If the demolition of Schwartz had upped my reputation, then the next fight against Otto Wallin would underline my status as a fighter big on entertainment value. The Swede was another hot prospect, a 20-0 fighter ranked at number 4 by the WBA, but like Schwartz, he wasn't anything for me to worry about. Or at least he shouldn't have been. But when Wallin caught me with a lucky left hook in the third, the stitching in his glove carved across my flesh, splitting open the right eyebrow and causing blood to pour down my face. A clash of heads in the fifth then opened up the skin above my right eyelid in a nasty cut that would later require 47 stitches. To everyone watching, I was a blood-splattered mess. My eyesight was blurred. Everything was covered in red. Worse, when I walked into my corner for treatment, it turned out that my cut man, Jorge Capetillo, hadn't brought the right tools with him. By the looks of things, he'd been asking people around the ring for spare bits of kit. Somehow, he was able to glue my eyebrow and eyelid, and by the 6th round, the doctor had given me the all-clear to continue. I remember Ben Davison stooping down to look at me between rounds. "How are you doing?" he said, checking over my wounds. "How am I doing?" I laughed. "My right eye is hanging out and there's blood everywhere. I live for this shit." It was true, too. I knew that if I could come through and defeat Wallin, my next opponent was going to be Wilder. With an incentive like that, no one was going to stop me. Not the bloke in the other corner, not the doctor, not the ref. I was as fit as a fiddle, and to prove it I went to war with Wallin for another 6 rounds, pummeling him with a series of body shots and bouncing him about with my big right. In the end, I won on a unanimous decision. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. Wilder won his 2 fights against the top 10 contenders, Dominic Breazeale and Luis Ortiz, knocking them both out. By the looks of it, both of us were ready. The promoters were on board too, and a few months later, after plenty of contractual wrangling, our next big showdown, Fury vs Wilder 2, was confirmed. A date had been set for the 22nd of February 2020 at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Vegas. It was on.
Yeah, like it was a really tough fight at a high pace. I took a lot of head shots, clean head punches, got up off the canvas a couple of times. And I remember at the end of the fight, like I come out of the ring and I said to my brother Shane, I said, "How many times did I go down there? 3 or 4 times?" Didn't remember. I knew I was in Las Vegas, but I didn't know where I was, didn't remember the hotel name, didn't know anything. Like, it must have been short-term memory loss because I couldn't remember what time I'd knocked him out in, what round I mean. It was scary because I got out of the ring and I felt little lumps on my head and I went straight to the doctor. I said, "Check these," because in boxing it happens a lot where they get punched in the head and the brain swells and they have to have their scalp taken off and let it whatever, and they might not recover, brain dead or even die. So I was quite scared. There's a lot of stuff worse than dying. I could have been left brain injured, being pushed around in a wheelchair and being a burden on my full family. So yeah, I was pretty scared at that moment. But when I got checked over, the doctor said I was totally fine. He said it was just like, obviously, trauma to the head, isn't it? When you get punched or hit, bump yourself, water rushes to that injured place. It swells, doesn't it? So fluid, inflammation. It was just like, you're okay, nothing, no proper damage, you're okay, totally fine, see you in a bit.